Welcome back to this series on the rapture of believers. And if you've seen the earlier episodes, then you would know that what I'm focusing upon is sane and sensible listening to the text, letting the passage speak for itself rather than twisting it to fit some kind of preconceived timetable and some scheme of events. And I can't keep all that in my mind. I remember John Maxwell saying once that when he got out of seminary, he had all these charts and things about the end times. He laid them out, covered the floor of his office. He was joking, of course. And he said he was looking at them and he's scratching his head. And he looked up and he said, "Well, Lord, can you make sense of this for me?" And the Lord said, "John, I was kind of hoping you would explain it to me. I think a lot of our theories are just going to fall by the wayside, but the words of Jesus will stand." So let's take a listen to the words of Jesus, the words of Paul, let them speak for themselves without twisting and stretching them into our preconceived ideas. And this word is a brief one. It's he who endures through to the end. Now that kind of tells you something right there, doesn't it? And it comes to us from Matthew 24, his great sermon about the end of times. And so it's right in the context of that. And he's saying here, beginning of verse 8, these are but the beginning of the birth pangs. Now, the birth pangs, I believe they're already coming upon us. I mean, in the acceleration and convergence of natural calamities of increasing intensity and frequency. I'll have a teaching on that and also teachings on unprecedented signs of the Lord's return. You can't say that this isn't the time based upon these signs. And nobody before our generation had any right to say they were living in the time when the Lord might return, because none of these signs were in place. Now they're all falling into place. And so the birth pangs that we're experiencing is the shaking of the world economy and the political systems and the nations in preparation so that people who love his appearing will learn to base their lives upon the security of being in him, upon that, within that kingdom that can't be shaken. All right, so all of these are but the beginning of birth pangs. That's what he says, Matthew 24, verse 8. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. Now, what is he talking about? Clearly, he's talking about once the birth pangs are beginning, then there's going to be a movement and a turning away from Christians and away from Jews. Those of us, people of that book, the Bible, will be hated by many. There will be massive persecution and even intense martyrdom. So naturally, people would like to escape going through a time like that. I certainly would like to too, but I would rather be found faithful and walk through in as trusting a way as I can, whatever the Lord might ask me to go through. All right, and so here we have it. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. Wow. I think that's a warning to Christians, that many will fall away from the faith. They'll fall into fear. They'll fall into betraying one another. They won't expect times like this to come upon them, and they will be unprepared to go through them. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because the lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. People will say, what's the point? What's the use of trying to live for the Lord? It's just getting worse and worse and worse. And so we have to find the way to keep our heart on fire for God and live for him, even if it seems like very few others are doing it. And now he says, but the one who endures through to the end will be saved. Highlight that. But the one who endures, you can't be an endurer unless you've got something that you don't want to go through that you have to go through to endure. And you endure by clinging to the Lord, by calling on him and hanging on to him for dear life as he walks you step by step through it. Because now that it's something you have to endure, you're all ears and you want his guidance and direction. And this, my friends, is one of the ways that he'll be cleansing his bride and preparing us as a people spotless, no stain of rebellion, wanting to live for ourselves, but clinging to him, wanting to take our steps under his direction and to live by his spirit. Okay, so now what does he say? And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. The word that can bring life and the same word that brings judgment to those who reject the words of life of the gospel. That has to go out to all the worlds. God is just and he's faithful and he wants all people to be saved. So that word has to go out to all the world. It will go out because missionaries are right now, as I speak right now, seeking out those people groups that don't have a Bible. They're working on the Bible translations. You can support these ministries if you like, and they have a timetable that the Lord might shorten or He might extend, but they can imagine within, let's say, 10 or 20 years, every people group on earth will have the Bible in their language, and probably that means every people group on earth will have had missionaries coming into their culture. And so this gospel will have gone out to all the world. It's already going out to all the world through Christian television and through the web and by radio and all sorts of other means. But He may be waiting for this, for the Bible to be, translated into the language of every people group on earth. And that's a formidable task, but we're getting close to the end of that task. And so He says He's waiting for that. And after that, here's what He says. After that, and then the end will come. So when is the end coming? Before all of this? No. After the tribulation of those days, after the birth pangs, after the tribulation and the martyrdom and the persecution, after the gospel goes out to all the world in the midst of that time, because He's keeping His faithful remnant down here, let's say, to purify us so that we learn to live for Him and not for ourselves, and to cling to Him in faith and faithfulness. And so He wants a bride that's spotless, but He also wants a bride that's giving a magnificent witness in the hopes that some will take that witness in and be saved. I imagine for every mortal, there's somebody that finally got the witness and was saved for all eternity because some precious soul was willing to give their life for Christ. In fact, the book of Revelation says it is so, that they kept the word of this testimony and they counted their lives laid down before God. That's I'm going to have to get that passage out for you in a little bit and get on with that. But it was the word of their testimony that defeated the dragon, and that they loved not their own lives even to death. There you go. And that's the martyrs. And so who are the ones that get saved? The ones, according to Jesus, who endure through to the end. Not to some fancy beginning, but through to the end. And so for us to be prepared, we need to be mentally ready to go through those times, but we also need to be getting our life in order so that we're actually living for the King who's coming, rather than chasing the world and its pleasures, rather than living for ourselves, finding His purpose for us and walking in His ways. That is the best preparation for going through anything. And it's a wonderful way to live each day as it comes. My friends, I hope to see you on the other side when all's been said and done and we've passed through the times. Come up and say hello once we've met the Lord in the air. God bless.